Hello, everybody. This is Elmina Bell. I am the visionary seater here at Indigenous Mental Health Awareness Network International, IMHANI, also known as Indigenius Mental Health. And I just wanted to take a moment to reset the intention of our New Age spirituality talk. We had some we had some kind of difficulties planning the event and also some things that went on the night before that kind of changed the structure up a little bit. And I just wanted to take some time to be transparent about that. For those who are in astrology, I have a Cancer 10th house, and in tropical and in Vedic I have Adra MC 10th house. So um being vulnerable and open with the public and transparent, that's part of like my calling and ways of connecting with people and bringing us closer. um, we had challenges around getting a human design reader for our event. We wanted to talk about new age spirituality in general, that we see in herbalism and astrology. Those were topics that people had brought up, but especially human design was the strongest in our community survey that we sent out, and in talks that we were having people offline about things that they would like to discuss around new age spirituality. And finally, through circulating our event, we were able to get an HD reader, and an HD reader of color at that. And the night before, on social media, a Latinx person saw our flyer and started accusing us of trying to steal um, the Walhalla concept from Lakota people, telling us we should work with actual Lakota people, that we don't really know how decolonization works, that this was the equivalent of Christian yoga. This was the type of things this person was saying. And it was just really drying for me because I had to go through a lot. Our team had to go through a lot to put this event on. And um, Asha also mentioned that a lot of times when she brings up human design changes or questions, there's a lot of challenges that she was facing as well too in these spaces, because she's in these spaces way longer than I have. And so we actually do have Lakota people in our network. We've worked with some offline, they also were they've also in the past been pushing this sentiment with people that Black Americans are settlers, um, and other immigrants that come in today are settlers. Not that Black Americans are not immigrants, but that they kind of grouped these populations together as, if you're not Native American, then you are a settler, basically. And when I made this organization, before I made this organization, and when it was just ideas in my journal, I had to make a decision about whether or not we would focus just on Indigenous African cultures and mental health, or if we would be inclusive of all Indigenous peoples and cultures. And I went back and forth about it for a while because I was like, I don't know an Indigenous Australian, like, as I was like, what if I can't get all the people and. And I went back and forth for a while, and I decided ultimately to be inclusive of all Indigenous cultures, because in studying different Indigenous cultures, I realized that the values and the principles are shared. The way it's expressed is very culturally unique, but the value system is shared, and that we have more in common than we have difference, and we have common obstacles, and we're stronger together. And Black people in Indigenous spaces get treated with anti-Blackness a lot. Um, and that is just a global thing. Even when we look at New Age spirituality and spirituality in general, um, the Indigenous African systems and the African diaspora traditions are seen as demonic, are seen as scary, and then the Indian and the Native American traditions and the Eastern traditions are kind of more romanticized. and more welcomed. And there are people of color who have been anti-Black towards Black people in various spaces. And even in America, some Black Americans who have mixtures of Indigenous African ancestry and Native American ancestry also experience that. And so these are some things that have happened to um, people in our network behind the scenes before. And it coming through in that night, I just felt like, okay, maybe I should put a PowerPoint together so our organization looks a little bit more organized. And we were not planning to have a PowerPoint for this event. We wanted to have a space where we were just talking, where people could see us, and we were just kind of like sharing ideas from the heart space. And a lot of Indigenous cultures valued oral traditions, like just having conversation, right? And that's kind of what I wanted for this particular event. Not that I don't like PowerPoints. I think PowerPoints are cool, and I do PowerPoints sometimes. But that wasn't planned. That was like kind of a last minute thing. And we kind of got so caught up in the PowerPoint that we did not like really talk about a lot of things that we wanted to discuss and the astrological inspirations behind the event and the movement work as inspirations behind the event. And so I just wanted to take a moment to say that we have different principles from around the world, basically, because we want to be inclusive of different Indigenous cultures. We have the Sankofa principle of loving reclamation of ancestral ways, which is from the Indigenous Akan people of West Africa. We have a Kapwa principle, which is indigenous in the Philippines. And we have Walhola, which is indigenous to Lakota people in Native America and Turtle Island. And the reason why I chose to engage with other indigenous communities to learn more about their principles and how they could be integrated into IMHANI is if I only chose to use indigenous African principles because living up to the intention and the purpose of IMHANI, that's to be inclusive of indigenous cultures globally. And also the the these principles, like Kappa, for instance, to me is a concept about relationships and interconnectedness. And that we can translate that into English when we say relationships and interconnectedness. However, these principles have they don't always translate easily into English because the English language and English culture may not have a conceptualization of some of these, how these principles are exercised. So when we are using a word, we're not just using the word because, oh, we want a word from another language, and we want to honor the indigenous ways. It's because we want to also exercise that we are not just calling something a certain thing just to honor it in like a, I guess you can say in like a basic way, but that it's an embodied practice that goes along with the indigenous ways of relationships, with the indigenous ways of respect, which is what Waholo means, which with the indigenous ways of Sankofa, right? So like there's practices and frameworks that go along with each of these principles that the English word for relationship or the English word for interconnectedness or the English word for reclamation may not fully be able to capture. And I wanted to keep those intact. So I just want to explain that because we had an issue directly tied to the topic at hand in a sense about how to go about using the tapping into healing traditions respectfully. And you go to the people who have these concepts or who have these traditions and you ask permission and you learn from them. You go to your own ancestors. You go to your higher self who also has knowledge from wisdom that is stored within your DNA about these traditions, right? So this is something that kind of changed the structure and the energy of the event. And I just wanted to be transparent about it and be transparent about the fact that BIPOC solidarity is centered here at IMHANI, despite anti-Blackness, despite problems that we may have in our individual communities or across communities. I think that we're stronger together. And when it comes to issues around ethics and honoring spiritual traditions, there was some kind of pushback around this event by some HD folks. Some I knew, some I didn't know. I had friends ask for me as well. But there was this similar response that an event like this, where people can express their concerns or questions or challenges with HD, and also kind of brainstorm about how it can be fixed, altered, and changed to honor the actual traditions that HD was appropriated from, would be in a way taking away other people's authority or telling others what to do, and trying to convert people. And that's not really what it was about. And it kind of, I guess, can look like that if we're coming from the Western perspective of what authority is. But if we're coming from indigenous perspectives of authority, and even looking at astrology, what is authority? It's Saturn. Saturn rules Capricorn and Aquarius. Aquarius is community. Authority is shared, right? Authority comes from listening to each other's perspectives, listening to each other's stories, and coming together to bring in different pieces of wisdom and insight and questions to create a holistic result, right? And if we're even looking at the Capricorn side, what is Capricorn's 10th house? Libra, Aquarius, balance. Balancing the injustices that are in our communities is what helps strengthen authority. Balancing injustices in spiritual traditions and unfair applications of indigenous cultural knowledge. In incomplete application of movement work principles and activism principles, a lot of which was done on the back of Black women, Black disabled women, Black queer women, right? So these are things that we have to keep in mind when we're talking about authority and how it's a shared thing that we kind of do together and grow together with. So I hope that you all can take something away from this event. From the feedback that we got from the people who did come live, we did get positive feedback and people wanting to connect more, and we're looking at ways to connect an online space soon, a free online space soon, where people can build more and we can share more of ideas and plans that we have for IMHANI coming through, because the world needs indigenous knowledge to be reawakened, and our ancestors are calling out for us to reclaim this knowledge. And the Astro inspiration that you'll see me and Ash talk about is very much connected to the South Node in Sag transit, which is Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter. And if we think about how we got to where we are now, Jupiterian energy was involved, right? And in astrology, Jupiter is always assumed to be the great benefic, positive, optimism. But all of these planets can be used by people. The energies and the themes of the planets can be used by people to perpetuate agendas. And I think part of decolonizing astrology is understanding that Jupiter, even though it seems it's supposed to be growth and optimism, expansion, and learning from different cultures, it actually deals with, when it's distorted, exploration and travel as a means to assert dogma in one's culture and religion on others. And we see this in history through things like the white man's burden, through manifest destiny, these philosophies that that white people created, that told them that they had the superior religion, the superior culture, and they have to civilize the world, right? And now we can use Jupiter energy to actually free ourselves from dogma. Anytime dogma is happening, where something's being forced on you, that is misuse of Jupiter energy. Jupiter energy is supposed to be open to expanding and growing, because spirit is eternal and it is, infinite and all these things. So just wanted to put that out there. That was also part of our inspiration. And thank you, everybody, for your support. I hope you enjoy the program, and feel free to share this event and any of our past events on our website, our link tree with others who may be interested.
So we will provide a document that has our inspiration, that has links and resources about decolonization and reindigenization. But for now, we're going to transition into the astrology portion and talk more about our inspiration for this event. And then you all will also have the original recordings from that day on human design and psychedelics and our speakers from those portions. So Ash, I want to hand it over to you. And I also wanted to say that we are an org that, again, we know that we can't do all things alone. We are open to white people, and Ash is our first white person, our first white speaker that we've ever had before in our events. So we have to have nuances and understand that, yes, white supremacy needs to be dismantled. White people need to be checked, but we also can't get caught up in identity politics, which is this idea that, oh, just because someone's Black or just because someone's Native American or whatever the case, they're gonna fight for us. They're gonna fight for people of color. They're going to be aware about liberation. This is not always true, because internalized oppression that was put on us during colonization and slavery is so strong. And so some BIPOC folks have internalized oppression, right? And these are things that we have to be aware of, the nuances of that they could still have learning to do, and around the fact that oppression is happening sometimes, and that sometimes you can meet white people who are very dedicated to the work and to dismantling. So we are very open org. We are open to working with anybody who's committed to doing the work, really. So I'm gonna give the floor to you, Ash, so you can talk about your the transits that were inspiring you around anti-oppression work, and yeah.
Thank you, Elmina. You know, I didn't get to say this during the first recording or the first gathering, but I do feel like a lot of the work that I have been doing has really been informed by you and other people of color and other white people who I feel are very dedicated to it. And I just want to say that I don't think I'd be here if it wasn't for you, and maybe that's not true. And I do feel ancestry has kind of led me, you know, to be doing this kind of work. But I do want to say that I don't think white people who are here and present, I've heard you say before, you know, this is kind of the result of people of color, right? It's the result of the work. And I just want to, you know, echo that, you know, that it's the grace of people who have called me in and have taught me where I've just been, you know, operating through blind spots and illusion. And that's really kind of my inspiration for, you know, both being here and just wanting to talk about these things and create conversations and spaces to even just find clarity in how we're practicing a lot of these healing modalities. So I don't know if everyone's familiar with astrology, so I'll kind of try and talk about some of the basics while also informing like some of the transits that are happening. So throughout the last year, I've been doing a lot of research on the Pluto return of the date of the Declaration of Independence and when that was signed. So some astrologers kind of see the Pluto return as a sort of revolution that happens once every 200 and roughly 250 years, which also tends to line up with the fall of empires. So it's kind of an important period that we have a lot of potential to both kind of abolish systems and kind of use the momentum of the astrology and what's present in the transits to help us with movement work. Of course, you know, we're always doing movement work, but how can we use these kind of celestial transits and the planets to help us actually actualize, you know, what we're aiming for? And that's, you know, liberation of all people. And we see across, you know, so many different lines, the way media, the way propaganda, the way education, the way all of these things that are supposed to be tools have really created a lot of, you know, the fog of white supremacy that sustains this system. And when we look into the actual chart of the United States, we can actually see Neptune at the midheaven. So of course, you know, the planets aren't negative, but when they're used by colonizers and by people like the founding fathers to create systems, they become negative. The way that they're used as tools can become very negative. So we see that this entire system has this, it's almost using spirit to create this fog. Neptune is kind of our relationship to spirit, our relationship to the unseen, how we can kind of integrate the non-linear. And what we have right now happening throughout this Pluto return is what's called a Neptune opposition to that Neptune. So it's almost as if this, our engagement with spirit, but also the way spirit has been used, you know, to kind of create propaganda, to sustain neoliberalism and the media, to sustain, you know, capitalism and this system. It's almost being challenged. There's a challenge between the transiting Neptune at the bottom of the chart, which is a lot of times what we see as our relationship to the land, our relationship to where we're actually located. So we really have a lot of potential to kind of recommit to the work with spirit, and a little bit see through some of the illusions that Neptune's been used to create through this system. But we can't do that without getting really clear in ourselves and how Neptune's being used and how sometimes Neptune is co-opted. It is sometimes fragmented. It can create illusion a lot of times, illusion that sometimes looks really glamorous or really shiny and new and popular and all these things. Like Neptune has that ability to, yeah, just kind of be popular in a sense. But Neptune at its root is, you know, our relationship to spirit. So there's a lot of potential here to, you know, when we're talking about things like anti-racism and anti-capitalism and anti-oppression and anti-colonialism, is, you know, how can we make sure that we're being intersectional in our approach to all of these things, that, you know, that we're not just taking these words as a costume or as a performance, and actually honoring the lineage of where they originate from and the struggles that these concepts originate from, right? Because again, using the analogy of the Neptune at the root that's being opposed to the natal Neptune of the US, is like, if we cut off the root, we're not really connected, right? We're not connected to the entire whole here. And I feel like that's kind of the danger. That's the danger of allowing these transits to continue while, you know, allowing these things to be cut off from the root, whether that's spiritual practices in their lineages, or just the co-optation of movement words, and, you know, separating them from being actually grounded in the people who are struggling in these movements. So that's a little bit of the astrology. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that, Elmina?
What you said about spirit being misused, I think it's important because people hear spirit and spirituality and think it's automatically good, right? And there are bad spirits or spirits that want to do harm, right? And it goes back to some conversations I've been having about people recently about the planets, and the fact that as someone who's in indigenous African spiritual systems that is connected to my bloodlines, I don't make offerings to the planets. I don't like worship them in that way, because I honor them, I respect them. They are very powerful celestial energies and they're transcendent. They're at a level that are at this high level that transcends any one culture because they affect everybody on earth, right? So they're not, at least from my perspective, they are not working at the capacity that a deity or an ancestor would. Deities are cultural specific. Ancestors are specific to you and your bloodline, right? And your family. So like, if everybody has access to the planets, that means anybody can use those resources available at that time with the given transit. And so I work with planets in a way of helping me understand reality and helping people in communities that I've been like called to serve understand what resources are available at a given time, right? So like if we're having you know, a well aspected Venus transits, like, okay, let's tap into our resources, our connection to our body and the five senses. Let's tap into how we can build relationships, right? And how can we do that from a liberatory decolonial perspective? How can we do that in a way that reflects Black people's ways of relating, or East Asian people's ways of relating, and all these different things, right? And looking at us psychologically and sociologically and seeing how we understand relationships versus how the West understands relationships. So that's kind of how I work with the planets. I don't really worship them in that way because my ancestors didn't really like worship Venus or Aphrodite, right? But the planet Venus is representative of principles in every culture. Every culture has an understanding of resources. Every culture has an understanding of relationships. It's just about how is that expressed. That's going to be different. And the deities that express those things is going to be different depending on culture. And one of the questions that we had from our community survey about questions and things to discuss is if you have to be of a certain culture, the Vedic Indian culture, to do sidereal astrology. And it's actually something I've heard before. And as someone who was doing sidereal, exploring sidereal for 2 years before I even got into learning about Vedic, which I started learning about it this year, I'd say, no, you don't have to be of the Vedic culture to look at the sidereal zodiac. Sidereal zodiac is, it's not, again, it's not culture specific. These are calculations, right? These are points in the sky. But if you want to do Vedic astrology, you definitely need to work with someone who has been trained and someone who is in the culture to understand it, because it is connected to a specific lineage of religious and spiritual traditions in a way that Western tropical astrology isn't. And so in Vedic astrology, there are deities connected to your placements called Nakshatras, right? And Nakshatras will tell you a lot of more information than just the sign that your planet is in. And so, for instance, there is, when they're working with the deities in the Vedic system, they're not worshiping like Jupiter per se, right? There is a deity connected to one of my nakshatras named Indra, and Jupiter has a lot of, each planet has multiple deities that are connected to it, but it's the deity that is being called on, right? It's Savitur that's being called on, it's Indra that's being called on, not the sun, right? Not Jupiter itself. But there are multiple deities who are tapping into themes that are different reflections of a planet. And so I think that distinction is very important. And that is why when you're getting into Vedic, and if you want to do the rituals connected to Vedic, it does require you to have an authentic relationship with those deities if you really want to fully immerse yourself in it. I got into sidereal just by, you know, journaling about my career path and where I wanted to go, and realizing that, and by being reflective, a lot of the work that I was doing reflected my sidereal placements. And I started to see that there's something about how sidereal is like an action that is showing up, or a goal that is achieved. And then tropical is like the perception of the self through that, how reality is being perceived. And I started, you know, testing this out with other people's charts. And I also started to apply indigenous African understandings of identity to astrology, and psychological understandings. I've done studying psychology, now I'm in the mental health field, and starting to see that, like, in order to understand the ascendant or the nature of a sign, the sign before and the sign after is very crucial to helping us understand the functions and what's happening there. So that's kind of my inspiration for how I got involved in sidereal. I didn't get into any of the Vedic stuff until this year. I had my first Vedic reading, and it was really good. It also aligned well with a fixed star reading, which I had by a traditional tropical person. But I don't plan to teach Vedic or practice it. I respect it, but I personally haven't been called to work with that lineage. But if you feel like you have been, there are Vedic astrologers that you can connect with to authentically learn. I just wanted to, I feel like this was a tangent off of what you were saying, but just talking about what you were saying about the planets and how they're used, I just wanted to also address that. So yeah, thank you, Ash, for talking about planets and spirit and how, like, anybody can use them. Like, the Nazis were using this. Like, we have today fascists who are like Trump supporters are also using astrology. So like it's a tool that is there, and it's universal themes. These planets represent transcendent universal themes that everyone kind of has access to.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's one more thing just to kind of reiterate too, is that astrology, like all spiritual systems, is, you know, living in capitalism. And again, referring back to the US chart with Neptune, there is like the US, and it's in Virgo, right? So this is labor. This is labor. This is like the labor force that's sustaining this. So there's almost this need to break away of, you know, how we're using these things to sustain this system. All of, you know, a lot of, and it's not even just in spiritual industries, it's in design in general, and all, you know, in the way industries are designed. Industrialism is designed under the US kind of system. There's a propensity to move back into this neoliberal space of this using Neptune to perform progress, or to perform, you know, change, you know, to advertise that, you know, one is doing the work, and just to caution people. You know, I know that people know, you know, most people are aware that these things are happening, but to even like well-meaning people make mistakes. And with Neptune, it's like, let's be open to critique and conversation, because Neptune is not an easy planet sometimes to navigate. So yeah, just kind of reiterating that it's work, right? It's not, we got to move into the space of doing that together.
Yeah, and sometimes it can be uncomfortable. You know, we can say anti-capitalist or anti-oppression, but if we're not committed to unlearning the ways in which we have internalized oppression and decide that, oh, well, we read a couple of books, so we're done. Right? Like we have to continuously be open to embodying and learning new anti-oppression work and new ways of reindigenization as well that can enrich us and help us expand and grow. I've been learning so much from about disability justice this year from people who are deaf, people who have mobility issues, and even from neurodivergences. I'm neurodivergent, but I guess I got so many diagnoses so later in my life that I had internalized ableism there too. So we have to continuously be open to doing that and not give into principles of capitalism, colonization, and white supremacy. There's a doc that you and I reference a lot.
Yeah, we can talk about a couple of those.
Yeah.
I love that you're bringing this up too. I didn't even realize just how much the Virgo, like the production and like the, with Neptune being in Virgo, it's like the system and how it's what does it mean to be even human and to be productive or to be efficient or to we could do a whole talk just on that, but it's let's go to these.
This doc, we referenced it a lot offline, and I've also referenced it in a couple of Astro events that I've done before. And it shows you principles that can kind of get in the way of doing anti-oppression work. So if we want to be truly decolonial, we're going to have to get rid of these internalized principles like fear of conflict, right? That if there's a conflict or there's a disagreement, we're just going to brush under the rug. We're not going to talk about it. We're going to hide it, right? There's things like only one right way, either or mentalities, and holistic. And indigenous peoples are holistic, right? And so that entails understanding that there's multiple paths to healing. There's multiple ways of doing something. And we see a lot in the Astro community, there is like, you need to use this house system, or you need to use sidereal, or you need to use tropical, you need to use trad, you just do modern. It's just very, that's reflective of colonial mentality that look, only my way is like the right way. We have to let go of these and embrace complementarity,
And the worship of the written word too is like kind of depending on written, definitions, instead of trusting the kind of ancestral pool or the intuition, like the non-linear. I think one of the things for me as like a white person in like kind of approaching these for the first time, one of the thoughts that I had around this was like surprised, I think, because I think a lot of people before you maybe approach this education or like political education is like assuming that white supremacy is a Nazi, right? And if you're not a Nazi, walking around like a Nazi, then you're fine, or that's them over there. There's this separation. And I think something with Neptune too, using that is like, this is an ocean that we are swimming in, right? That we can't separate ourselves from it. Like we are constantly immersed in this, and that these things show up in very, they're not small ways, but they show up in ways that you might surprise you, because it's at least for me, coming from a design background, things like sense of urgency, this quickness of I need this done yesterday is very common. There are things that, kind of foster a culture of white supremacy that, it's almost a little bit more difficult to call out and say, well, this is, white supremacy culture, because it doesn't look like, a Nazi or what someone would describe as a Nazi, but they actually, by continuing to facilitate and be complacent to cultures that allow these types of behaviors just in the day-to-day, is what fosters and sustains white supremacy.
Yeah, I definitely feel all of that. And the point that you talked about the written word thing, I think that's very important when we're talking about doing ancestor work, because a lot of people will say, well, I don't know. I don't have any documents or any written stuff about my ancestors, the slavery and colonization, all of that was lost. Or I don't even have, I have like European names and all of this. Even me, like I'm a continental, my parents are continental African, so I'm 100% African, right? But my last name is Bell, and I have cousins who have European last names too, because the colonization was so strong, right? But when we met past this understanding of the written word, and we look at the Gemini, the tropical Gemini and sidereal Taurus connection, which I was speaking about before when we did this live. Gemini is about learning, and it's about information, right? And it can also be about writing and communication, because that's a form of communication and learning. But on a sidereal level, that's Taurus. And Taurus is the five senses, it's your body, it's the first sign, and it deals with nature and nature's elements. Mm-hmm. And so when we start looking at nature as a source of education, when we start doing the work to heal our bodies from trauma, so that we can be able to listen to our intuition and hear our ancestors speaking through our bodies, when we do the work to like cleanse our auras so that we can hear our ancestors communicating through dreams or communicating through books, even just being aware of the many ways that they can communicate. They communicate through books, pictures, a movie, a rock that you found on the side of the street. But if we're not clear, and if we are still dealing with so much trauma and not allowing our bodies time to rest, which is what Taurus can teach us, we're not going to be able to access this information as easily about our lineages. There are things that I've learned about my lineages and my ancestry that didn't come through books, right? Or that didn't come through someone in my family being like, hey, here's this family tree, right? So there's so many ways that this can come through, and we talked about this in some of our previous events. If you want to check out our previous recordings, we're also going to link in some resources of inspiration and articles regarding this, but I just wanted to talk about that worship of the written word issue, especially when it comes to where we have the nodes now of North Node and Gemini and sidereal Taurus, about learning and words and communication. Yeah, that was very important. And what you said about people, you know, thinking, oh, I'm not a Nazi, so like this is what it is, right? There's this pyramid that is a pyramid diagram that I think is very helpful for people to understand white supremacy, and understand that if we're going to be decolonial, we have to attack like every part of this pyramid. I'm not sure if I can share. I've never shared on a phone before. Maybe I can add it in the chat and then you can see it, maybe. No, I can't add. I can only write in the chat. Okay, I'm gonna put it on the document. How about that?
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I wanted to say too, with the Taurus, something that came to mind when you were speaking with like the written word too, is like, you know, again, like the signs and the planets, they're not like, we can't apply that one right way, or, you know, even believing the written word thing to these energies. So when we think of Taurus, it is value. So it's like, are we valuing things through the framework of the conditioned, you know, system that we live in of colonial white supremacy, or are we valuing, you know, our ancestors, the process of decolonization and reindigenization? So that's something to keep in mind. And I want to just give Elmina like just so much like love, because for me, I spent what felt like my entire life as an adopted person. You know, later finding out that I was adopted from a family in Mexico, I'm very white, you know, so I just had no idea that I had these roots. And for my entire life was told, like, it's in your head, you know, the things that you're picking up on, they're not real, like just so much gaslighting and, you know, oppressing my own feelings and being told that I was wrong. And even, you know, as, yeah, from all over the place. Yeah. And to, you know, our first reading, it was like you had confirmed everything that I felt, you know, so that's a big reason why I just want to support this work so much, because it's, I'm sure there's so many more people out there that have been gaslit by this system to believe they're wrong, right? Or to believe that what they feel isn't true or isn't right.
Yeah, that's really important, and that's why divination and reading and mediumship is seen in all indigenous cultures as prioritized. Like, this is something that people do and value. It's not seen as woo-woo. It's not seen as all of these terms that we see now thrown around that try and separate spirit from science to delegitimize spiritual knowledge and the fact that our ancestors can speak through us through these mediums and through these divinations and through mediumship and trance and all of these things. And it's just, the mediumship readings for me, we're taught to be scared of the dead. We're taught to be scared of the ancestors, but feeling the love of people's ancestors during those meetings, it just adds so much affirmation to the work. But yeah, this was this pyramid here, if you can zoom in on that a bit. Going back to what you were saying about, like, sometimes people think that because they're not at the top of the pyramid, right, like the Nazi, that they are fine, like they're not there's no oppressive stuff happening from them, and we can think about this in other forms of privilege, going back to what you were saying, you know, with your meme about intersectionality. Like, if you're a man, or if you are a person of color but you're a lighter skinned person, or if you have thin privilege and you don't have to deal with that phobia but you may be enabling it in some way. So, like, we can look at this white supremacy as the source of all these things, but we can also examine this when we're looking at an intersectional level of our other identities. But the point is that indifference and minimization is at the bottom of this pyramid, right? So, like, when we
Holding
see
it up.
harm happening and we don't do anything, it's like the ancestor MLK said, a threat, a threat to justice anywhere is a threat everywhere. Like, that's going to eventually trickle and affect everyone else. So when we see those things and we're silent in those times, like he would say, I put together a lot of MLK quotes for my Aquarius and Age of Air article that I wrote back in December. And he would talk about the importance of not being silent while oppression's happening, because that's really what holds it up. It's like all the people going along with this, right? Mm-hmm. And so this event was inspired by an importance to have a space to talk about issues that are being minimized, because on the surface, they may not look like the Nazi stuff, right? Especially with the human design situation. Asha, who was our human design speaker for this, our human design reader of color for this, they had spoken to me the day before the event about the fact that they face challenges in the human design community for speaking about racial issues and speaking about problems. And that was also issues that I was facing offline with trying to get people, and that other friends who were trying to find human design folks to come were facing. It's just like, well, we're good people and we're not the Nazis at the top, and we've already made enough changes to the system, right? Mm-hmm. Rather than listening to people from other perspectives who have different marginalized identities and who have different lived experiences in these movements that were birthed by the most marginalized, the Black women, the queer people, disabled, darker skinned folks. So we had to think about, in any given situation, are we going to center the most marginalized, or are we going to center the people who have the more privilege and more certain comforts, and understanding the intersectionality of that even if you're even if you're white and you're like, well, I'm poor, so like I don't have to deal with, I'm not doing that. You still benefit from the society that's set up to benefit from you, and you're still not aware of certain things that other people are going through. And this pyramid here, I think, really speaks to this event. Another thing that I think speaks to this event with the North Node in Gemini, Gemini is known to be curious, asking questions. And someone told me a couple of days before this event that I can come off as pushy because I am always consistently questioning. I'm consistently questioning. And I'm like, the irony of being told this during a North Node Gemini transit when we're supposed to be asking questions about what is the opposite of Gemini, Sagittarius, dogma, when it's imbalanced, right? When it's balanced, it's about philosophies, our belief systems, our faith that can strengthen us. But now when we're dealing with imbalances as we do with the nodes, we're seeing dogma, we're seeing attachment to religious systems, sometimes at the expense of like asking questions about where they really come from, or if it's really resonant for me, or what does this word actually mean? What can this word in the system of this placement be used to do, or be used to categorize someone under a hierarchy or things of that nature? So a quote that I like of somebody who led a lot of decolonization movements in Africa and the Caribbean, Frantz Fanon. He says, make me a man who asks questions. Maketh of me a man who always asks questions. And I think that that also speaks to this event. And I also wanted to speak of the ancestor of Maya Angelou, who was a North Node in Gemini tropically, natally. She would speak about words obviously all the time. She was a poet, she was a writer, but she had a quote that says that, I hope that one day we will realize the power of words. They sink into your walls, they sink into the air, and they eventually like sink into you, like sink into your body. And it reminds me of the sidereal connection between tropical air and sidereal earth, that words really cement our realities in certain ways. The things that we say, how we frame concepts, how we frame placements in any of these divination systems really add structures to our reality. It really sits in our bodies, and words become laws. Words become, be put in textbooks that become credentials that people use to say, I'm certified in this, I'm a certified reader, I'm a certified professor. And we're seeing now with the South Node and Sag that just because someone has a credential, it doesn't mean that they are going to treat you in an ethical way. It doesn't mean that they are going to be understanding of racial issues, diversity issues, LGBTQ issues, historical things, honoring Indigenous peoples. And we're really being asked to look at our ethics and our codes and whether we are living up to them and whether they're reflective of the people that we're actually serving and the values that we say that we're doing, right? We are saying that we're doing something, that we need to like put our action there to align with that. And something interesting that you brought up that just came back to me now, I know this is going way back, but you talked about you're in fashion. And I want to touch on something real quickly about the Met Gala stuff that happened not too long ago, and how in my Twitter feed, there was so much polarization around that fashion event because Venus can deal with like artistic things like fashion and politics.
Neptune too, like just the glamour.
Yes, and yes. And the glamour, the artistic element, the creativity there, especially with Pisces energy as well. And for those who use, sometimes people will say Venus is exalted in Pisces. And I've had my issues with exaltation and stuff. I'm not going to get into that today, but anyway, the point is, this event was very interesting because, again, there was a polarization in my Twitter feed where there were people who were very anti this gala. And then there were other people who were like, oh my God, this is like Venus, like getting paid and getting honored, right? And as a Venusian myself, I'm a Libra sun in North Node in tropical and sidereal. And in tropical, I'm a Libra rising. So I did not feel, the gala made me uncomfortable in the way that it was not really necessary. Like, they could have just gone with a different theme, but there were specific artists who wanted to use political slogans that they didn't have to do that. Not all the artists did that, but they chose to, but then chose not to censor the people. Yeah, no, they stole it. They didn't choose to center the people that those concepts came from. And my thing is, okay, if you're gonna want it to be political, go and work with the people who these things came from, right? And I have a degree, my bachelor's is actually in political science, and then I have a postdoc in psychology, but I have a lot of experience working in politics, even domestically. I was born and raised here in DC. I did protests with people who are on the inside of politics and those who are like anti-politics. So I've been in, on a range of places that I've even been where AOC has been, like when she was first running and she's like, I'm gonna do all this, I'm gonna do all that. And then you get there and it's just like, no, they're not gonna let you do that. But you had to make a decision, right? You have to make a choice to be like, okay, I'm either going to stick to these principles and follow them through that I've set forth, or I'm going to try and modify myself so that I can still finagle my way in this system and be here, right? And so she made the decision to kind of modify some of the things that she wanted to do and like dilute them a bit in order to, be there. And it's a thing that a lot of people who go into politics ending up having to do, because these systems aren't set up, the political systems aren't set up for, the transformative work. They're only set up for a few reforms. They're not really there to address root causes of systemic problems, right? And so it's something that most people who go into politics end up doing because that's what they have to do. And a lot of my friends who, were in studying political science with me, very few of us stayed in the field. And the ones that do, that are being authentic to the work, they're scapegoated a lot, they are mistreated, but they're still helping people where they can. And I applaud them for doing that. But it's not easy at all to do political work. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is because people think Venus and fashion is just that fashion, right? It's just about being pretty and fashion and all this. And like and all of these things have been colonized. Beauty has been colonized. Fashion has been colonized. Art has been colonized. Design has been colonized, right? And it's been separated from the people don't know that Venus rules politics. It's like justice. That's what it's supposed to rule. So when I was seeing the discourse that, oh, this is just supposed to be a fun fashion event and you guys are making it political and this and that, it's just like,
it is political.
It isn't. Venus is political on its own. And then these people made it political by choosing these political statements, right? About,
they're extracting,
the rich and feminism, because there was also something about feminism and patriarchy. There was a lot going on, right? And it's just like, this is what Venus does. But because of like colonization and capitalism and wanting to present Venus in a certain way, we don't investigate or tap into Venus's radical ability to bring forth so much social change that is needed. Venus, from the Mesopotamian perspective, Inanna Ishtar was the goddess that was represented by Venus in that culture, was a goddess of warfare and justice and vengeance. So we have to like kind of, when we're talking about decolonizing astrology, looking at the different ways that Venus's themes can be understood in different cultures. If you go to other cultures, in Africa, if you look at the Orishas, if you look at the spirit guides that were associated with love and partnership, they were also associated with standing up for yourself. They were also associated with justice and righting wrongs as well, and doing that in a very intense way. Each sign and each planet can have the shadow of its opposite there, facilitating things on an internal level. So that Martian energy is also present there, like on some sort of level. Opposites share polar, they share energy. So I just wanted to touch on that too, because, the planets in capitalism was one of the things that people had been talking a lot about offline and like on the survey for this event as well.
It's a good example too of the planets being used to move back into that neoliberal space. Is, the revolution or movement work is not commodification, but under capitalism, we believe that when we see slogans on t-shirts or, even putting these slogans on like dresses and fancy things, that it's it's dangerous in my opinion, because you get a certain amount of the population believing like, see, there's change happening, see, like, you know, there's these things happening. And I'll throw myself out there, is that like, that was one of the biggest mistakes I made as a designer, kind of thinking that putting a slogan on a t-shirt was, you know, in any way creating change and creating progress. And it was a mentor, a Black mentor in my life, that said, who was very, very centralized in Black liberation work, that said, Ashley, Black liberation is not an opportunity for white people to make a portfolio piece. And it's something that I've tried and I don't want to say failed, but it happens all over the design world. People thinking that, you know, just making a portfolio piece or, you know, without being, like, as you said, grounded in the movement, building relationships, having conversations, even being open to feedback from people who birth these movements, birth these slogans. You know, it's creating more fragmentation rather than solidifying our solidarity to create a stronger movement.
Yeah, people need to be more open to conversation. This North Node in Gemini, I've seen that with this transit, some people have not really been like following that flow. There's like this running from conversation. And I think that the air placements, air energies, when it comes to how it's seen under capitalism and colonization, is devalued, because air is about communication, relationships, and community. If we're thinking about Gemini, Libra, you know, Aquarius, and all of these are about connection and relationships. And we're in a society that's hyper individualist. That's like, you just worry about yourself, and it distorts fire energy, like the Aries, to make it very combative, and make it very much, I don't care about anyone else but myself, right? And so with the tropical North Node in Gemini, having conversations like this event where people could just like write out what they wanted to, they were able to do it in like some people did it anonymously for the things they wanted to say, and just express it and get it out there. You know, our ancestors were silenced for so long, and so like it's so necessary to get out these conversations, to ask these questions and to say these things and not silence that. And I think that on a sidereal level with Taurus, people don't realize the patience communication requires. The fact that you can't fix everything in a couple of text messages sometimes, or even just one call. Sometimes you may need to have multiple calls. Sometimes you may need to take a break and then come back to it later. And you set up a time and be like, look, can we get back to this next week? Because I'm still processing this, right? That's the work of relationship and community. It's about being committed to having those conversations and seeing and learning from others, and knowing that we impact each other, right? And that it's important for us to understand the impacts we're having on each other and to be learning from each other. And that requires patience, like on that sidereal Taurus level. Like, are you gonna be patient enough to sit through these tough conversations, or these questions that are being asked, or are you just gonna, like, you know, avoid it all?
Absolutely. It's a really important. My question for us, I guess, too, is like, because I would love to continue, you know, having conversations like this and inviting more people to share their concerns and share things that they're experiencing. What do you see for like the future of these efforts with IMHANI?
Well, we've always wanted to have a space where practitioners can come and like learn from each other and talk with each other. It's just been about capacity and like getting the organization for that ready. We are a volunteer run organization. So like we said, when we made this shift to like take donations from this event for white folks, all of our events have been free in the past, right? And we're volunteer run. And so it's about like us building things offline to get more spaces ready. And I think we are inching closer to that, which is why with this event, we asked folks, we are ready now to like start building with more people and like expanding our group of us, because it's only 5 of us now on like the actual like e-board team, to create a space where practitioners can learn from each other and share what they're doing and share about ethics and how they're embodying movement work principles and indigenous knowledge and re-indigenizing in their lives and in their practices, and also have opportunities for people to teach workshops about this from whatever their perspective lane is. So like if they're astrology or if they're herbalist, they can come and have a workshop about how they're integrating these practices into their work, and we can grow it from there. So that's kind of like what we're like envisioning, in like kind of building offline and being open more now at a stage where we can invite people to work with to create these kind of spaces that we can sustain this work like in a larger way.
Very cool. I love that. It's so needed, and I'm very appreciative to share this space with you and just to start these conversations. It's definitely needed. Definitely needed in all the industries.
Yeah, and it enhances the work because the human design portion is coming right after this, and it is a lot of me. Like first I read off concerns that were written from like our surveys and stuff, and then I was just talking about my personal human design reading after that, after I read those things with Asha, and Asha was asking me, you know, questions about HD and how I felt about it. And it's a lot of questioning, and it can seem daunting at first when you're getting hit with a lot of questions. But Asha wanted these questions asked, right? Which I really appreciate.
Yeah,
because
they
want to, and they're now using like the content from those questions that were generated when we had the talk to build their human design projects for BIPOC. So it's just like, this is a generative thing that it was questions, but now it's like in her mind, like being built to create content that is more inclusive, because they didn't come through human design like in a linear way. They learned about I Ching, and they also have Indian ancestry, so they learned about chakras, and then they like went into human design and astrology. Like it was not like, you know, this other thing. And that's what I'm trying to get people to do. Like, we have Asha here, and it was actually kind of a challenge for us to find human design folks who to come. So I'm really grateful that Asha was able to step up. And some of the concerns that people raised in the survey and in our communications offline with folks were a lot around human design. Out of all the topics that we've had, human design was the one that was the most concerning. And a part of it is because human design is different from astrology and like these other divination systems, numerology, and all those things, because of it doesn't really have a lineages that it can be connected to in a more clear way. So it was invented by a teacher who called themselves Ra. In the 80s, they were doing psychedelics, and they had these downloads of this system, which basically kind of ties together astrology with I Ching and with to some degree chakras, and was also inspired by Kabbalah in some ways. And he basically like appropriated these different traditions and combined it with astrology and his visions that he had during his psychedelic trips, and created this system. And so some of the concerns, I'm just going to read some of the things that people have said. And so these are also concerns that I have. I got a human design reading done and still felt a little uncomfortable after it. One of the issues that people have is the percentage breakdowns of the types. So with human design, there's this percentages that go around that say that 70% of the world is the generator type. And then the projectors are, I think, maybe 15-20%. Then there's manifestors, and then reflectors are like 2% or something like that. And the reflectors and the projectors are seen as like healers, teachers, and guides. And then the manifestors are seen as like pharaohs. And then the generators are seen as like slaves to the pharaohs, which is the terminology that Ra would use to talk about the types. And he basically said that generators are very easily falling prey to be slaves in their not self, what he called their not self ideology, when they're very more easily inclined to be in that kind of like slavery mentality, and that the pharaohs are like the manifestors and all of these types of things. And whenever something has percentage breakdowns that have the majority of the population is one thing, and then a special small percentage point, it gives like eugenics undertones for people to kind of misuse that information that is presented. And recently, while some videos of the founder was going around, there were people who were sharing the video and saying, well, if you don't get this video, it means you're not meant to understand it. And similarly, just throughout the human design community, there's this idea that like people just interpret words differently. And like, if you don't get it, that means that the system's not for you, right? And so these kind of things can make people feel alienated. Like, okay, are they not intelligent enough to get human design? Like, it's only for a couple of people, you know? And whereas with these other systems, like numerology, which uses numbers, your name, and your birthday, everybody has a name, everyone has a birthday. In astrology, everyone has a birthday, right? These are things that everybody should have some kind of access to. So those percentages create alienation. Another thing that people are having issues with is the word undefined for placements. So undefined usually means what they mean in the HD system, that it's an energy that is more mutable, that is a more flexible, creative kind of energy. But the usage of undefined the word undefined, people have taken it to mean that the people with the undefined placement cannot function, or they're not functioning well in that placement. And there's like concerns about if that wording still needs to be used and how that can be reframed, and how do the also non-sacral is sometimes used, indicating kind of a lack of functioning around a certain area. Again, all of these things, the percentage breakdowns, undefined, non-sacral, the common thread around them that people are saying is that they all in a way convey some type of lack, that certain people have other things that I don't have. And while everybody is different and we're not all the same, there's a way in which other divination systems are more focused on aligning a person with what they have available and helping them understand the resources there, rather than defining them in ways of like what they're lacking. Like in astrology, you may not have any Aries placements, but you have a Mars that can show those themes behind Aries. The Mars will show how you take action, right? Everybody has Mars. Everybody has, even if you don't have a sign in your planets, you have it in your houses somewhere, and there's ways to more clearly focus on that, like in a more holistic way, and that's a concern people have. And so what we want to do here today with Asha is kind of focus more on the roots that HD came from. So each of the I Ching, chakras, these are systems that are real and that have long ancient histories, right? And that have wisdom and that really help people. And so we want to look at those to try and understand better how we can reframe things in HD, and also respect the lineages that I Ching and chakras have come from, because a lot of people are talking about HD, but they don't know that these are the traditions behind it, and there's not really awareness of the philosophies of those traditions, and if they align with this HD language. And with, so I guess the downside sometimes when there's a lot of air energy in the in astrology, as air deals with information, is people become so hungry for information sometimes, that they kind of don't really care about what philosophy is tied to, which is like the more upright version of Sagittarius, when it's balanced, honoring a philosophy of like, and a tradition and a culture of where something came from. So like there is this need to kind of temper our need for lots of information with that genuine aligned curious energy of Gemini, to take a step back and be like, okay, where did this information really come from, and how can we honor the lineages and the traditions behind it? So Asha, you can introduce yourself and talk about how HD has helped you in the I Ching tradition that you have a lot of experience in, and also your work with chakras and all of that. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for having me, and thank you for the way that you've framed the concern that people have. I think it's just really important, right? Like we can have tools that really help us, and we can still be critics of it. Like both things can exist. So yes, my name is Asha D. Ramakrishna. I live in Nipmuc land, which is in Harvard, Massachusetts, and I'll explain why that's also important and part of like the complexity of this topic, right? Honoring ancient cultures. And I am Venezuelan. I was born and raised in Venezuela, and I am of Indian descent, trained as a molecular biologist and turned mystic. And my relationship with human design really came 16 years ago. I have a reflector daughter, and really it was, I didn't understand her. And I was desperate to try to see what was this human? Why was this human? You know, I thought I was a hippie mama, but this person, I wasn't able to have her be like in harmony and peace. And if you know human design, you know that reflectors are here to show us the well-being of community. And really what she was reflecting back to our community, aka probably my marriage and where we were living, was that something was off. It was in disruption. And so somebody said, have you heard of human design? And I was like, no, bring it on. Again, 16 years ago. And it really gave me a context to understanding who she was. And then, of course, you know, if you have kids or you have someone that, you know, pushes you to grow, you then, it becomes a doorway, right? The pain of the experience becomes a doorway to, well, how do I know myself more? And how do I heal the parts of myself that are contributing to, you know, either my further pain or the pain of others? And so that was my first initial experience. And then I, you know, started learning about, well, my own strategy, being a manifesting generator, the strategy of my partner who was a generator, and how we all kind of played like how we interacted with each other based on the types that we were. And so, as it was alluded to, human design is a compilation of Eastern, Western astrology, the I Ching, the Chakra System, Kabbalah, and actually also quantum mechanics. And before we kind of like address some of the questions that came up, and I'd love for you to like keep, you know, ask me more specific questions, I feel like I need to back us up a little bit, and back us up a little bit in understanding why are we in this place where we have these amazing tools, because these are tools, right? These are not the end all be all, these are tools. We have these tools and we are desperate for them. We are desperate for understanding ourselves. We are desperate for you know, finding ways of feeling more connection, healing our wounded parts. And so how do we honor them, and how do we look at systems that look problematic and are problematic. Its roots are problematic, especially with human design. But again, let's back us up. Why are we in this place? And so I have some ideas, and I'd love for anyone, in the comments, if you want to throw out more ideas. But I have some ideas, but I also have some possible solutions, so that we're not like, so we're not talking about like what's wrong. I also want to offer some solution or some starting point for a solution. The very first thing, let's call it, well, actually, it is a problem. The very first problem is that each of us, if you live in Turtle Island in the United States, we live in stolen land. And the fact that we live in stolen land cannot be overlooked. And so that in and of itself, the very ground we sit in, has tension. And it can be part of the tension that we feel. And so the solution, or the way that I would invite us all to consider doing, is that when we begin anything spiritual or where we're wanting to connect, is can we ask the indigenous stewards of our land for permission? So that's why I offered you the link, so that you could look up exactly who those indigenous stewards are. Ask for permission. Ask their permission. Wait to hear their permission. Sometimes it'll be no. And when it's no, the next question is, well, who do I need to become? What do I need to be doing in order to be able to do ceremony in this land, or be doing some kind of ritual in this land? Ask for permission. The second thing that I also want us to remember is that many of us are hungry, right? Are hungry for the wisdom. And we're hungry for the wisdom because we have been uprooted from our indigenous traditions. That's the truth. No matter, for most of us anyway, no matter our identity, we have been stripped of our traditions. And so we take whatever is accessible. I mean, I know I've been on this path for, over 20 years. And so being on this path for over 20 years, in a lot of ways, even from my own lineage, Hindu lineage, I had to take the crumbs that were available to me because that's what was accessible to me. And that's a problem, right? If there's something that is of your root and you're having to take the crumbs, that's a little sad. And it also speaks to, wow, all these things have been taken and they've been translated. And part of the translation, even if, I'm a yogini, and I know that when I first started doing yoga, part of what happened in that translation from India to, say, the US, or even India to Venezuela, where I first started practicing yoga, that the roots of the culture don't travel with the translation. And when the roots of the culture don't travel with the translation, that causes big problems. You see this in Reiki, right? It's like, people, everyone's doing Reiki, and everyone has forgotten that it's actually of Shinto roots. And so if you don't understand the roots of it, you're going to miss out on the richness that it actually offers. And that's with everything. So let's remember that. So what's the solution to that, right? I think it's about re-indigenizing ourselves and being in ceremonial space with our ancestral council, as it was mentioned earlier, and to really like connect with that ancestral council and use these tools that come up as a way to bring us closer. I really do believe that the ultimate intention, the ultimate fulfillment is when we connect with our indigenous roots. Another thing is that I do not want to idolize some of the patriarchal translations of these ancient cultures, even with the Vedas. I know that there's a lot of patriarchy that is, you know, in between all the teachings, and the solution anyway that I've been able to find is to learn from teachers who come from that lineage, who are also have a liberation lens. So that are understanding that some of these teachings may have patriarchal concepts, and they are in devotion to liberation, and can kind of unpack that with us, for us in community. And so, you know, just wanted to kind of start off with that, because it's hard to talk about the complexity of human design and how crazy it can look before we really kind of address those pieces. So, and I wanted to, anything, and if you have anything that you want to say to that, I'm happy to kind of jump into the specifics that have been brought up. Anything you want to say, Elmina?
I just want to again thank you, and for bringing your perspective, and just going back to what we were saying earlier about the Gemini energy and the importance of words. The reason why the undefined thing was hard for me was not just the way people were misusing it online, but it was hard for me because I'm a Black woman. I'm also neurodivergent, and I'm come from an immigrant family. I have to define myself, because if I don't, then systems are going to define what Black womanhood is supposed to look like and all these other things for me. And so, like, having an undefined throat and like a weak G factor, our G identity point, didn't really resonate with me personally as like a Black neurodivergent woman doing Indigenous practices where empowerment of yourself and your community and your identities is so important,
For sure. Yeah. So let's talk about this very problematic person. In many ways, I feel like I have been shielded from his energy because of the teachers that I've had. I will agree that it's a really big problem to have a white man who does not necessarily have a very evolved way of communicating. um, I don't know, maybe not a very highly evolved ethics. um, I think it is problematic, right? And so I find myself, and I've found myself in a tension of, here's this person who is so crass in the way that he wants to shock people into their their types, what they really need to be doing. And also, on the other hand, I am an acknowledgement and an honoring that, for whatever reason, this combination of a I guess I would call it a meta system, right, that incorporates a lot of things, has also brought a lot of liberation for me, and a lot of liberation for my family, and a lot of liberation for the people that I have worked with. And I think it's okay to uh, to acknowledge something that is brilliant, and critique who it comes from. Again, I'm a yogini. The person who started the lineage of the yoga tradition that I was a part of was also very problematic. I mean, he was Hindu and still very problematic, and so I don't consider myself of that community, because I can't. I can't. I can't be for something, but the practice in and of itself has brought me a lot of strength, right? And so that there is this tension, and I think it's honest. And I think if people feel like, well, I can't be in alignment with something that was founded by someone who has no ethics, or has no lens of liberation, and no lens of um, valuing people, and from my interpretation, I would say he probably does not. And I think a lot of leaders in human design don't have a lot of understanding of what it's like to live in identities on the fringes and experience the system, right? So we get into this problem of, oh, this is a brilliant system, take it or leave it, maybe it's not for you. And I think we can get in a lot of trouble with that, because there's actually an opportunity, just like with anything else, to actually listen to the richness in other humans' experiences of it, right? I'm in collaboration, with a Black woman on changing some of this dialogue in human design, because for like the way she was saying to me is like, there's no way that that a white man person can have the same experiences with an open solar plexus. So open solar plexus is like how we feel emotion. There's no way that a white man is having the same experience as I am. Like it's just, there's just no way. And so these voices of people on that we we've been named in the marginalized identities. I think it's important, and I don't necessarily think it's about equalizing the playing field. I think it's actually adding richness to these conversations and these systems. I want to talk about your question of this undefined define, and so let's reword that. These words don't necessarily come to me from me. They come from the person who's taught me of human design, which is Karen Curry Parker, and she uses the terms open and define. And so when we have definition, there's a consistency about how we experience that specific aspect. And when we have openness, it's really about us being here to learn about that energy and to become wise about that. And let me back up one more level, is that ultimately, just as in astrology, we have the entire chart. We do. We get to experience the entire chart by way of a few things. Direct communication with the stars. I think that we overlook that when we're drawing our charts and learning about our charts. I think we overlook the fact that we can be in ceremonial relationship with the stars, with the constellations. And in the same way, we can be in direct relationship with um, with the transits. So just as astrology has transits, human design has transits. And, for some people, maybe this isn't necessarily the topic here, but for some people, sometimes we outgrow our birth charts and we find ourselves being limited by the chart. And we start looking at the entire chart, whether it's astrology or human design, and we begin to have that direct relationship with the entire chart, so that we are in exploration of what that means and what that is. So ultimately, we have the entire chart. We have entire access to everything, whether it's open or there's definition and consistency. We can play with all this as we, when we look at the directions, right? North, east, south, west, above, below, and then there's us as the intersection of everything, and us as the interpreters of our own experience, and each of these tools that we get to play with. And let's see, I love that you brought up the percentage piece, and that's something that I hadn't thought of, but thank you for bringing that up. I really appreciate you bringing that up. I think I'm going to stop using that, I didn't look at it necessarily as it makes, if there's a smaller number of people, it makes them special. Because I look at it as like we're all in community, right? We are in community together as a civilization, as families, as co-workers, as businesses, as organizations, right? We are in community together, and each of us serves a specific purpose in the community. And I don't necessarily see a hierarchy. I know that there, there always has to be, like, it can't be, I love equal voice. Like, I'm all about equal voice. And I also think like someone's got to be kind of like putting us to task a little bit, right? Um, but I think it's valuable that we accept each other's differences and the way that we operate, and work with it. I mean, I've really loved human design because when I understand that somebody has an open G center, and sometimes people have talked about open G centers as like they don't know who they are. I feel like actually they're very wise about who others are, and they get to have different kinds of experiences. And so when I'm around somebody with an open G center, I love to know that, because if I go to a restaurant with them, I want to be able to say, like, where does it feel good for you to sit? It's a way for me to honor who they are. Same with projectors. Sometimes I know that many people who are either manifestors, projectors, and even reflectors, I have not always had opportunities in their upbringing for people to really value the powerful contribution that they can bring to communities. And so part of their healing is unpacking, deconditioning, as we call it in human design, from their upbringing or even from society, and tapping back into, like, okay, what am I about and how can I practice this? And so that's the way that I see it. I don't know if there's something else you want to say or ask me that I missed. I know you wanted to talk about the chakras and the I Ching, and I can talk a little bit about that, and how, if you're into human design, how you can begin to honor those parts of the system. Does that feel good to go next?
Yeah, I think that would be really good for people to go to, because me personally, I have a hard time resonating with human design.
Yeah.
I feel like if I could learn more about the I Ching, and chakras, then I would probably, feel more connected. But something that you said about like asking the other person what they want, it kind of reminded me of um what people say sometimes about Libra energy.
Okay.
Um, I just wanted to touch on it for a second. We just left Libra tropically, but we just got there in sidereal. And when it comes to understanding of the self and identity, which is what human design claims to do, right? It's
Mm,
like this is supposed to be a tool to help you understand yourself so you can be your best self, right?
mm,
Um, and honestly, any divination tool should be able to tell you that, right? It doesn't matter
mhm,
what it is,
mhm,
astrology,
mhm.
maybe even throwing shells or bones, whatever you're using, you're trying to get information, true information about yourself. But something that I think is important for us when we are decolonizing the concept of identity is that from an indigenous perspective, identity and relationships, which I guess you could say is in astrology, that's Aries Libra, is not as disconnected as it's presented. So I'm not, I feel like if we are using relationships and community, which is the air, Libra, Aquarius thing, if we're using those properly, they should be helping our identity, right?
Mhm.
There should be community spaces where we should be able to exercise our hobbies and do the things that we like and share ourselves with people. And so there's ways in which you can use your seeing the world through the lens of relationship and community is something that indigenous peoples globally value, going back to our Kapwa principle from later. So like we have a relationship with a book, we have a relationship with knowledge. We don't just have relationships with people. Everything is relationship. And you can't define anything or identify anyone without their relationship to certain things. So I just wanted to put that out there in terms of like identity being seen as weak if there is relationship stuff involved. They're part and parcel of each other.
Oh, I think that that is what has been lost, right? The what has been lost in this um, thirst that we've had for healing or for wisdom, and inhabiting these healing spaces, as you said, like new age spaces or any kind of spirituality. I think that what we have lost is that this isn't actually about just the individual, right? That is a patriarchal colonizing mentality, that we're here for just us to get our things, manifest all our things. If we look at every single one of these traditions, indigenous traditions to Turtle Island, indigenous traditions to India, indigenous traditions to China, to Japan, Africa, it is about community and the land. Like those can't be forgotten. We can't forget the land. Uh, um, Being stewards of the land is like, that is like a number one thing. And that's why I even said, like, ask permissions, because the very land we live in, there's tension there. And that right there, when if there's nothing else that you focus on, quite frankly, from my opinion, you can have whatever certifications and degrees we all want to have and love, and because we all love this, like, ooh, give me more. But if all we can do, all we do is just sit with the land and ask for permission, and until we have that communication, if all we do is that, that is sacred work. That is sacred work. And so, yeah, let's talk a little bit about these traditions that dance around human design. I was lucky enough 19 years ago to begin learning about the I Ching, and from a Tibetan tantric Buddhist teacher. He was from China, and the I Ching is a divination tool. And the way that the divination comes through, it is by throwing coins, and you sort of get the answer, and then you go look it up in your book, and then you read what the story says. So part of what human design has done is to take that story that is within the I Ching and try to condense it down to a word. That's essentially what has happened, right? So if you are, if you talk about, gate, like the gate 1, which is really it's the first hexagram, they talk that it's creativity. So what I feel is that what we have forgotten is, how do we actually read the entire mythic story, and then have enough space in our lives to listen to what is the actual message. And also, I just want to like be super transparent that I do think that the I Ching in and of itself has patriarchal lines all around it. And I'm happy to like give book resources, but also, publishing world is also a place where a lot of diverse voices don't get to speak the truths in this medicine. So I don't want to give out those book resources, because I think that the best way that we can find out about I Ching is to actually go to a teacher that has been studying this and who has that liberation lens. Ultimately, that's the ultimate way. And if we can sit with each of these stories and be in the listening, be even in ceremonial space, and be in the listening to, what is this hexagram telling me? And there's some people that say, listen, Asha, this is a meta system. It's not about the parts. And I really think that it is about the parts. I think that if you are a human design teacher and you don't really know the foundation of astrology, you're missing out on really disseminating like grounded information. So I think it's important that you have the foundation of astrology. I mean, I kind of went backwards, so I understand if anyone went backwards also. I saw astrology and I was like, okay, that looks very convoluted. So I started with I Ching a long time ago, my Hindu tradition with the chakras, and the entire Hindu yogic system. And 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 then after many, many years of human design, then I was like, okay, yes, I get strategy, super practical, love it. I mean, I'm a practical person, so I love that. I need to learn more about astrology. That's where I really need to learn. Okay, oh, awesome. This has the I Ching. I already have a foundation there. The chakras, okay, I already have a foundation there. And then when you really have the foundation in those places, then you become, you can not be taking these videos from this man as the teaching, but the parts become the actual teaching. So with the chakra systems, I know that in human design, so in human design, the chakras look a little bit different. And, I don't know what I think about that necessarily, because I think the chakras that are outlined in human design and the chakras that most of us know about are just the basic ones. There are more. There are more energy centers. And so, when you look at other traditions, we all have energy centers. Even in, when people like mix chakras and Reiki, like those aren't appropriate to be together. Does Reiki and Shinto have energy bodies? Yes. And that's of that tradition. This is a separate tradition. The way that I look at, very condensed way of looking at the chakra systems is of understanding that we have energy centers that run through us, and we have relationships with, whoops, is that me? Sorry. We have relationships with our own energy systems. We have relationships to the themes within these energy systems. We have internal work to do in there. The way that I see with human design, it feels to me more like this is like one approach, one lens, but I don't think it's definitive. I wouldn't look at it at least for me, I wouldn't look at it that way. If you happen to have an open solar plexus, I don't think it's about you not having sacral energy. And I think it's more about you having an exploration with your sacral energy that may not always be consistent or in the same flavor as someone who has definition there. You may just have a more vivid and alive and rich exploration with that energy. And yeah, I would recommend that if you have an open sacral, that you be really mindful of how much of your energy you're exerting out, right? So if you work in a job where it's very demanding, and the schedule is very consistent and it depletes you, to me that would be an indicator that open sacral is actually wanting like waves of work, right? It's wanting like 2 days on, 3 days off, or, oh, I'm in this project. Let me just like do this project. And then I need time to rest because I got to unplug it. For those of us who are super, super sensitive, which I put myself in that category. And I think my daughter, who's a reflector, has been a real teacher for me of what sensitivity looks like, because everything in her is completely open. What does that mean when someone has openness? To me, it means like there's an exploration, and she is, and let me tell you, like maybe people think that people who are reflectors are just like can't handle life. That is not true. My daughter is such a resilient soul, and she is so alive and so playing with the transits and so dynamic and such a humanitarian because of her sensitivity. So the openness, to me, it's a beautiful way of exploring our relationship to ourselves, to others, and to the land. Any specific questions you want to ask? I know I don't have all day here. I could talk all day, so I want to make sure that I'm staying on your schedule too.
We have about 10 more minutes for this portion, but I like what you were saying about the openness. I do feel like though I don't have these placements, so I'm not a reflector, and I'm also not because the reflectors are the ones that are all open, and I'm also not a non-sacral manifester or non-sacral projector. I'm a generator, right? I'm a pure generator.
Mhm.
And so I don't have these placements, but in my astrology, I have a lot of like 12th house energies.
Mm-hmm.
So I am still very sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
So something that I feel like with the generator thing, because a lot of generators, since that's the majority, allegedly, they say the majority of the population is generators, like 70% or whatever. A lot of them resonate with a lot of stuff that's not for their type, was what I'm saying. Like we fit into these other things. And so there's different types of generators when you get your personal reading done that can show you like certain other placements within your human design as to why you may not resonate with being a generator. But then that goes to like, for me, then that even makes me feel like, what's the point of me identifying as a generator then? Because in astrology, like I grew up not resonating with Libra. I didn't want to be. I was like, I don't resonate with these stereotypes. That's not me. And then I went through this phase when I first got my chart, found out I had a Virgo moon, found out I had a Scorpio Venus and all this type of stuff. And I was like, oh, like this is like why, I wasn't resonating with that. And then I had another layer of discovery and I was like, no, I am a Libra. And these other placements aren't taking away from me being a Libra, because Libra has core root principles around balance, around relationships and things, around harmony and balance and justice and all these things. And so you can have lots of different Libras. Some of them are fashion designers.
Yep.
Some of them don't want to have nothing to do with fashion and art. Some of them are more in justice. Some of them are creating balance in work through the way they organize things at their job. So there's so many different ways the energy can be done, but there's those core Libra themes are there, right? But I'm having trouble with human design finding like, okay,
Let's
like
do it. Yeah,
what is the core theme of the generators? Because I'm not really resonating with this.
Gotcha. Yeah. All right. So if you are in exploration of human design, just like in astrology, right? If you are, Sun in Libra, that's not going to be the whole story, right? There's your ascendant, there's your moon, there's, the exploration of all the other outer planets, inner planets, right? So that's not your whole story. Same thing in human design. Your type, whether you are a manifestor, manifesting generator, generator, projector, reflector, is not the whole story. It's an archetype. And just as in astrology, where we could say there's a hierarchy of impact, right, or effect in our lives, right? Like we would say that, okay, there's a kind of like a level of priority that we give certain aspects or certain planets, right, than we would others, if we're going to like dissect it, right? But ultimately it's about the whole, right? Just as in astrology. It's similar in human design. So the hierarchy of priority that I would give is, yes, what your type is, and it's an archetype. So just as we would look at astrology archetypes, the archetype of Libra, the archetype of Leo, there's an archetype with your profile and type. There's also an archetype with the type, which is 2 numbers. Those are important to also consider because those archetypes hold information that are pretty prominent in your life. So it should be the 2 numbers. The second archetypal aspects would be the definition and openness of the different chakras within human design context. They have archetypal energy. So for me, being an open solar plexus energy, that's what makes me kind of sensitive, right? Like I'm a pretty steady person, all of that, but I definitely am an empathic person. I feel people's emotions, right? And so somebody who has like open head and ajna, they might be like those people that get all these downloads and all this inspiration and all this information, and there's like obvious, those would be like the hierarchy of priorities that I would give. But let's talk about the because we can't talk about all the archetypes and go through everything. Let's talk about each of them and what their role is within community. So our manifestors, their role in community is to spark, like to spark and initiate. That's really their role. You can be around a manifestor, and I know so many amazing manifestors who are CEOs of their companies or whatever. Like you're around them and you're just like, oh my God, I can do everything. Like they just like get you super excited and initiate that piece. Then there are our projectors. You know, the role that they have is to sometimes, for the most part, be these quiet leaders and guides. And they are the people that are not necessarily always going to be like, let me tell you what to do, but but there's a wisdom about them. And it's a very sweet wisdom that can be, you know, it's so wonderful to be in relationships with projectors because they have such insight onto to who others are and the possibilities of what they can hold. And that's what I see their role is. Then there are the manifesting generators. I believe that manifesting generators are the ones who are here to evolve and change things. So I'm a manifesting generator. You know, I love to be involved in a lot of different projects, and maybe a lot of MGs feel this way, like, oh, I do all kinds of things. And then we really, when we can come into the thing that we're lineage holders for, we tend to evolve it. So that's why I've been kicked out of so many human design islands, because I push against the system. I push against systems at play, spiritual systems at play. And it's not always fun and pretty, but I feel like part of what can and manifesting generator can initiate is change and evolution. Generator types are here to become um, great teachers of their craft. And they have a process by which they do that, which is that they do a thing, they get to a certain place, and then they hit a plateau. And in that plateau, there's an opportunity for them to evolve. And they feel like, oh, I'm going to quit now. This is over for me. I don't see anything happening here. And really what's happening is that they need to just wait for the universe to give them the next thing that will allow for their teaching to become even better. Our reflectors are here to show us how we're doing as a community. So when my reflector daughter was, you know, being spirited, which was my nice word for how she was for most of her childhood, it was really what she was really indicating is that actually me and our family and the community that we were in needed to work on some things. Because if she's reflecting back disharmony, it means that we have to work in our own internal disharmony. And when they are thriving, we know that that community is correct for them. And it's correct for them. Yes, and also that community is also a very a relatively healthy community. Does that help a little bit?
It helps a little, but I was more so thinking along the lines of like, if there's an because I don't know the I Ching, so I don't even know if this would be the right way to put this. But if there's like a I Ching way of like identifying,
Yes.
like, so like what I guess theme or story or something in the I Ching would generators be associated with, something like that. Because
I see.
to be honest, like I get what you're saying.
Yep.
But for me, it still feels like so fragmented because in astrology we have so many themes that we can connect something to, which is why now I claim my whole chart, but I don't have a problem claiming that I'm a Libra anymore. And I know that there's this core thing because I know it's about air.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's about, you know, like there's and there's also animals, you know, associated with the different things. So there's nature's elements there, there's animals there, there's myths present. So we have these stories that are present in astrology and the I Ching and these other things, but in human design, it's like we just get like the end result, but not those like I guess those stories or those myths or those symbols or those elements or those symbols. So, like something like along those lines, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. And I don't necessarily need to have you be a convert of human design, you know. I mean, like that's also okay too, right? And what I'm hearing anyway is that there's always a journey, right? Similar to the astrology piece, there's a journey. It's like, I don't connect with my sun, but let me find out more. So it's like, I don't connect with this generator thing. Do I want to find out more? Right. And so the strategy is for you to actually turn on to your sacral and be like, does human design even turn me on? Like, is my sacral like jazzed up about learning about this thing, or is it a no? And it's for generator types, manifesting generators or generators, if your sacral is saying like hell no, it's a hell no, or it could be a hell no for right now, right? And so the next level of like where you can access more, just as you would in astrology, like sun and ascendant and moon, we would look at our sun and earth and human design, and what specific I Ching hexagrams are within that, or gates, and if you want to name it in the human design context. So we would look at that, and is that archetype living there, right? So my sense anyway is that it's hard to say I'm a generator type or I'm a whatever type and be able to identify with that in and of itself. And I think that's why people feel so like that most people who are all about human design can't stop at what's my type and strategy. Like they have to like keep digging and digging and digging. Um, and that digging for some of us is what allows us to see these like richer hidden parts of ourselves that are like, oh yeah, that's a yeah for me. That okay, I like this, or I can see how that plays a role in my life, and where do I have conditioning from my upbringing, my culture, um, my epigenetics, that I want to try to start unpacking and healing. I really feel, my sense anyway, is that just as other modalities, as other tools can be great liberators, I think this also has an opportunity for that. And I know I'm not answering your question as specific as you wanted, but you can see how there's like layer upon layer here.
I missed the question, and we are kind of like running out of time, but
Sure.
I think if you could drop like a resource for this or something with regards to chakras, what do you think is missing from the dominant spiritual convo on chakras and centers? What do you notice isn't recognized? And I know you talked about earlier kind of
Yeah.
conceptualizing the non-sacral and the open and all of that, but is there any like resources that you have that you can point people to for that, or?
Um, not necessarily. I most, without getting into a whole thing, it's mostly that those that first set of chakra within the body graph within our bodies is one story. It's like part of a story. We have higher chakras, lower chakras that that also require a relationship. It's okay to begin where we are. Just know that, oh, there's actually more. There's other energy centers that we have access to of different kinds of information, as you can imagine, right? If there are chakras below our feet, that information can kind of be in communication with uh, the earth realm. And so, yeah. Oh, you're muted.
I want to say thank you so much for being here. And you said,
You're
and
welcome.
for being, mentioning your challenges with other HD spaces. It's very brave of you to like be able to show up. So I just want to say thank you for that, because we were talking yesterday about those challenges, and it
Yeah.
really took a lot for us to get here, you guys, to be able to have
Yeah.
this space to talk about this. So hopefully those who are called to this can reach out to learn to reach out with you in a more one-on-one to learn more about chakras and these other things that were brought up here today. Thank you so much, Asha. We're
Thank you
gonna
for
transition
having
now
me.
to our intermission, and we will be back at 4:05, and then we will talk about herbalism and psychedelics at that time. Okay, thank you. We're back now. So now we are going to shift into our next part of this, which is about psychedelics and herbalism. So the reason why we wanted to speak about this or call attention to this is because with holistic healing coming more on the rise, people are turning more to plant medicines for healing and for cleansing. But like Asha was saying earlier, like this comes from land and there's spirits that guard these medicines, and there's a lot of tension because of colonial powers and capitalistic powers and their relationships to the land that can kind of sometimes complicate our understanding of these medicines, or corporations that kind of market these herbs and these medicines in a way that's disconnected from the roots. So we felt like today would be an important day to talk about this. Something that I would like to bring up, and then I also want to bring in a friend, Sheena, who I've had a lot of offline conversations about this with, is the psychedelics and mental health. As somebody who's in the mental health field, um, I I know and I've seen that plant medicines can help people with mental health, but I've also seen that sometimes people who are helping people, sometimes people who have this plant medicines and they're helping people who have mental health issues, they are not really fully equipped to understand or assess if a person is ready to take those, or certain herbs that a person can't take. A lot of times people just jump into things without reviewing the preparatory practices set forth by the lineage that that plant usage came from, right? And how it's very important for people to listen to their bodies and their own ancestral guides when it comes to being guided to certain plants and using certain plants and working with people, because of the way in which the sensitivities of our brains can merge with these medicines. I'm somebody who personally has used lots of herbal supplements and teas to help me with my mental and my physical health, and also use burning certain incenses and herbs to help raise the healing energy in a space and for cleansing. So I definitely know that these plants can help our mental health and our physical health and our spaces. And that when it comes to mental health, sometimes people say, oh, you need to go to a therapist, you don't need to go to a reader, you don't need to go to an herbalist, you need to go to a therapist, you need to go to a psychiatrist. And IMHANI, our team, the reason why we've even created this group is because sometimes therapists and psychiatrists haven't been able to help people, because of the fact that the mental health crisis that people may be having, or even if it's not at a crisis level, whatever impairments are going on, they are being um, felt in the spiritual realm or our ancestral, and the psychiatrists and the therapists don't have the tools to deal with what is coming up in people now, especially with our ancestors speaking through us more loudly and our own higher self speaking through us more loudly, because of the amount of time that colonization and slavery has been going on, the amount of time that our peoples continue to be abused, but just transforming the names of old systems in new ways, right? So the more that these things happen, the more our ancestors and our own spirits are going to speak through us. And if we don't have the right tools, we don't have connections, then that can cause, you know, energy overload for us, which can manifest as physical issues or mental health issues. It doesn't mean that we're being punished or that we're doing anything wrong or that we're somehow causing our own illnesses. it's just about energetic sensitivities reacting to energies that have been oppressed for a long time and now need to like come out to be healed. And from an Indigenous perspective, it's not that we don't have medicines or we don't have therapies, we do, but they come with a different set of philosophies that requires decolonization and unlearning the idea that therapy or healing has to look a certain way. So I just want to preface this conversation with that. And I also wanted to invite Sheena and Mignon if you also have something that you want to share as well, and anyone else for this conversation.
Hi, my name is Sheena. I'm one of the people that Elmina was speaking on. And one thing I just wanted to point out, I guess start this off, is that most of the understanding of psychedelics, especially when we talk about psilocybin, magic mushrooms, that understanding mostly comes from a white gentleman named Timothy Leary. You can pretty much go any avenue that you can think of, academics, spirituality, everything will boil back down to Timothy Leary in some way, shape, or form. Now, how did Timothy Leary get his understanding of magic mushrooms? He obtained his knowledge from an indigenous woman. I will Google what tribe the name of the exact tribe she came from, but she was an indigenous person from the land that we now know as Mexico. And her name was Maria Sabina. She was from Oaxaca in southern Mexico. And she was an indigenous woman who taught Timothy Leary and other white Western people about the medicines and benefit from taking magic mushrooms. And that has, because magic mushrooms is not new to indigenous people. Many indigenous cultures around the world have used some sort of psilocybin fungi to have visions, to process download, to receive downloads, I should say. And because it's really a two-part thing, or a three-part thing, really. You have to prepare for the journey, you take the journey itself, and then you integrate what you saw and experienced through the journey afterwards into your life. That's, I think, the simplest way I could put it. So Timothy Leary hooked up with Maria Sabina. Maria Sabina pretty much taught Leary and other Western contemporaries of his about psilocybin within their specific, and that's another thing we have to keep in mind. They're only learning it within one specific indigenous context, which was the context of Maria Sabina's tribe. I'm trying to pull up what tribe she was from exactly. And this is pretty much the basis of what we know as psychedelics in the West. And she's pretty much, thank you, Alberto. Thank you. She was Zapotec. And because there are other tribes, other indigenous tribes within Mexico who also use this plant, and they use it in, the way they consume it is very different from how I'm sorry, I just lost my whole train of thought. How many times psilocybin is presented, like, oh, you have to receive the messages that the mushrooms are going to give you, that you don't like. There's a general context within Western psilocybin consumption is that you are basically submissive to the mushroom. Whereas if you research other indigenous tribes within Mexico and how they consume psilocybin, you'll often find that, I think it's the Masatec as well, where you basically, they'll put the mushrooms on a plate in front of you. You will consume as much as you can, and you consume it with your purpose for taking the journey in mind. But that hasn't been publicized because, as I was saying, Timothy Leary only learned about psilocybin consumption within this one context for Maria Sabina. So Maria Sabina is very much an exalted figure as a result within the West, but oftentimes there's certain parts of the story which are omitted, which was that Maria Sabina eventually became an outcast within her own tribe because they were upset that she had betrayed their indigenous culture by basically exposing all of their sacred rites to Westerners and had opened them up to exploitation. And at the obviously we can't verify this scientifically, I put that in quotes, but it's been alleged that by the time Maria Sabina, she had already been cut off from being able to go on journeys as a result, as a punishment for having exposed everything. And she had to be, oh, all right. Can you still hear me? Because it says my connection's unstable.
You were out for a second, but we got you. We got you now.
Okay, cool. So that's the story of Maria Sabina shows how indigenous spirituality can be at once exploited and thrown away. Because once they got what they needed from Maria Sabina, they did not care that she was cut off from source. They got what they needed, and it brings us, I guess, to this current juncture in time where we need to have these discussions, because my place is as a advocate for these sacred plant medicines, especially within the context of policy and equity. And I don't know if people are following where we're seeing across the United States movements to decriminalize the use of these sacred plant medicines, and not just psilocybin, but ayahuasca, DMT, mescaline, a lot of these medicines that we know induce psychedelic states. And what will that decriminalization look like? Even cannabis, where I'm very heavily involved. We can decriminalize, because let's keep it real. How do you criminalize? It's very funny when you think about criminalizing a plant. I mean, the plant existed long before we place these contexts on it, and truth be told, it's going to continue existing long after we're gone, hopefully. So we're here at this point in time where we're supposedly moving forward with policies that will allegedly open up and provide access to safe plant medicines, but we're seeing recreations of the same oppressive systems, starting with the origin story that I just spoke on. And I do thank Elmina, I thank IMHANI for creating the space where we can at least talk about it, because a lot of times these discussions will end up falling on the wayside as, oh, you're asking for too much, when if anything, we're by continually suppressing these kinds of discussions, you're only perpetuating the same type of oppression that will end up if you fuck around, spirit will cut you off.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And what you said earlier about how this is just one tribe's use, right? Yes. And that became like the framework of how to use psychedelics everywhere. And people may have even applied this to different plants that are not even that plant, and how the diversity and the context of the indigenous cultures was not honored in that. And it's just assumed that these plants are always going to be worked with in the same way every time for everybody, right? And that's just not realistic.
No, it's a very cookie cutter approach. And something that I've also been seeing, which does concern me, is that especially for people of color, you know, specifically BIPOC of the Americas, what we're seeing now is a lot of, you know, BIPOC wanting to reconnect with their ancestral roots. So you go, you know, searching and you find these plant medicines, and you may even be lucky enough to find other BIPOC practitioners to guide you on these journeys. But because like 99% of psychedelic knowledge boils back to Timothy Leary and Maria Sabina, in many ways, we're still practicing a form of oppression because we don't know how, you know, we don't have a lot of access to knowledge to see how psilocybin was used outside of these contexts, throughout, outside of, like you were saying before, Elmina, outside of the Zapotec context. So you may have BIPOC practitioners, but they're still, but because we're still so dependent on Timothy, you know, the Timothy Leary complex. That's just what I'm just going to call it TLC. from here forth, we're seeing a lot of perpetration of the same abuse, only it's faces that look like ours, and it doesn't make it any better.
That's actually a little bit worse, I'd say, because it makes it tricky, because you assume that oh, because the person is a person of color, that they have all of this information. But when we're getting our information from books written by white people or anthropologists who basically claimed that they wanted to learn about indigenous cultures, but really just were there to cherry pick certain things that they thought were cool and kind of exoticize people and also infantilize them, we lose a lot of knowledge and we lose a lot of what's really happening. And we also lose opportunities to get to know what plants are around us. So, meaning what plants are on the land that we live on currently, right? And also what plants may have our ancestors use wherever they were from. And so we kind of have to start asking these questions like, okay, so well, what plant is around me? Or if I got this plant and somebody mailed it to me from somewhere else. So like, for instance, I've gotten some from California before, which is not near where I am. But I looked into, okay, what this plant was grown in California. What is the native tribe from this place of California that I got this from? What also, like, I could even see astrologically in my chart through things like astrocartography, what energy for me personally did I get this from? It's on my Mars line. So this plant is going to it's going to affect me this way, right? A lot of people can take these plants and be affected differently. And that's why something that I think all the indigenous cultures agree on, before anyone takes any plants or takes any bath or anything like that, they have to do a divination to see if, is this the plant for you? How is it going to affect you? Are your spirits going to be meshing well with this plant's spirits? Is it going to be function? Does it have the energy for what you need in your life right now? And a lot of what's happening now is people are skipping over that process and they're just going to like a dealer, right, to get these plants, where they're just ordering a bath online, whatever the case is, without really like going through this process of inquiry to cultivate a relationship with the plant, where it's from, and if that's actually what's needed in this time. So these are some like questions that I like invite people to ask.
Yeah, can I jump in there for a minute?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for creating the space and for allowing me to come in with a little bit of information. I just recently had a wonderful discussion with a master herbalist. She comes from the Hoodoo tradition. She's a medicine woman and she works very, very closely with plants. And from my relationship with her, I'm actually expanding my knowledge about the plant arena, the plant world and realm. And one thing that was stressed in that discussion, which is very imperative, is that what you had just said, a relationship. we have taken the spirit out of the practice of using these medicines, and the cultural context from which they come from, the spiritual context from which they come from. Plants are intelligent beings. They are alive. They have personalities, and you must approach them with reverence and understanding. It's not by accident that the indigenous ancient people discovered what these herbs did. How did they know these plants did? How did they know? They built a relationship with them. They spoke to them. They listened to them, and they asked permission to use them. You know, we think as humans that we can walk around and pluck and do whatever we want to with things, but we must understand that everything is sentient beings. They're alive, they're living, and they have a purpose here on this planet in the divine plan, and they are on their own mission. So you must approach them with respect, with reverence, and ask their permission and learn them, get to know them as personalities. When I was speaking with her, she says a lot of the herbs have personalities, and she actually develops relationships, and she understands what they want and whether or not they want to be bothered, whether or not they want you to take them. You have to, because some people have a violent reaction to some of these psychedelics because maybe that herb does not want to work with that person. So they're just not, this automatic remedy like taking a pill. They are alive. And so I think that is valuable information for us to walk with in dealing with any herb, any plant medicine that is for our healing, that we really understand that they are alive and they are sentient, and you have to develop a relationship and ask permission for them to heal you. And I just wanted to throw that in there into the discussion. I'm loving the discussion, and thank you so much for this platform.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes, plants do have personalities, and I've noticed that sometimes people get into the problem with New Age spirituality is it comes off very fragmented, right? So people come to whatever it is, whether it's, psychedelics, astrology, whatever, even the indigenous African traditions, and it's very extractive. What can I just use to help me personally or fix this problem, right? Just very linearly. And that's not how indigenous peoples work. That's not the holistic energy that they have. It's not about just, okay, I'm just going to do this 1-2 things to fix X problem. It's a holistic process, integrating systems, integrating spirits in and around you, expanding your awareness and concept of yourself. If you are outside on the grass and you're meditating and you're barefoot and you feel the healing energy of the earth, that's nice. But it's problematic if you feel that all of that was your doing, right? There were spirits within you, your ancestral guides and your spirit guides, that spoke to in the spiritual realm without your knowledge, the spirit guides and the ancestral guides of that land that you're on, that facilitated that process for you. It's for you to even walk there, to be led there, to get to that park, or to travel to wherever you are, for you to have that healing nature experience. And so if we're just saying, oh, we're gonna, and I see this in the mental health field too, people are wanting to prescribe nature. Like, oh, just take a nature trip to de-stress. But then they're disconnecting it from the fact that national parks was a colonial project that displaced indigenous peoples so that white people can come and look at how pretty the trees are, or how pretty the ocean is, or how nice the grass feels. So when we're approaching things in an extractive way, just, oh, I just want it to feel good, we're not even getting the full medicine, and we're creating energetic blockages in the long run for ourselves when we don't try to pay homage to the systems around us, and understanding that healing and trying to fix a problem is so much more layered, and requires more relationships than we think it does.
No, these are all really great points, Elmina and Mignon. Is that how you pronounce? Yeah, yes. I loved what you brought up about building the relationships with these plants, because, for example, when we talk about psilocybin or cannabis that you see in the background, there are many different strains of magic mushrooms, and the native peoples to those areas built relationships with whatever species was closest to them. So it's not just, like whenever, and to talk about desensitizing and hyper individualism, even if we look at the modern dispensary experience for cannabis, because I'm a medical marijuana patient in New York State, and yet when I go in, I don't even go in anymore, to be honest with you, but the few times I have been inside a dispensary, it's a very cold clinical experience, very divorced from the spiritual nature of cannabis. And it's funny how all of these areas overlap, because a lot of times, even within the cannabis space, it's a joke like, oh, you feel bad, just go smoke some Blue Dream, you'll be all right. And it's like, no, everybody cannot just smoke one strain and it's going to be a cure-all for everything. No. And that's why we built the relationships with these plants, to know what's going to work for what. And it brings to mind, I literally just came from the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. And if you have a chance, go and do the audio tour. There's an audio tour that was prepared by a Shinnecock historian of native flora. And one of the audio tour notes was in regards to cedar, that there were, Native American tribes would often gift each other whatever cedar was in their area, whatever cedar was local to them. And every type of cedar had different properties. So when they gifted these plants to each other, it was very significant because of the honor of each plant's individuality. So to go from that to going into this dispensary where you're only, especially I'm only going to speak on New York State, where you have like one sativa, one hybrid, and one indica. You've completely separated it. And another thing is that oftentimes now when we talk about cannabis specifically, and even that, I'm starting to see it more with psilocybin too, mushrooms, that there's really even almost a flattening of the spiritual integration when you do see, if you touch on that at all. And there's not a lot of, how do I say it? There's not a lot of guidance during, like, the way I experienced psilocybin the first time I took my high dose was that someone did sit with me. They did the divination, as Elmina described. They did the divination. I went, I cleansed my energy centers, and I prepared to receive the message, but I had somebody sitting with me. And it goes to show you also the very communal nature of these rites. And when you have this, very like robotic dispensary experience, you're almost taking out the community from these rites. And these rites also help to reinforce community bonds. And because it's not just community, it's the type of community. Is this community supporting your development in a healthy way? So really, really love the points that are being made here, because there's a lot of points that people, and I'm saying this even within our, I'm going to call it plant liberation movements. It's a aspect that we often forget.
Healing happens in community. It's not done alone. That's a very important thing. Going back to what I was saying earlier about the whole extractive, this is for me thing. Something I also want to read is a little passage that I've shared before on my Instagram, from
the elder Malidoma Patrice Somé. They are an indigenous African spiritual teacher from Burkina Faso. And in their book, The Healing Wisdom of Africa, they say in indigenous African culture, just as there is high respect for artists and healers, there is a similar respect for the person who is experiencing a psychological crisis. This crisis is seen as a result of intense interaction with the other world, making the person think and act crazily. Resolving that crisis in an indigenous community results in releasing that person's gifts to the community. The very gifts won through that person's intense dealing with spirits. Every time I encounter a modern person who is in crisis, a person whom other people refer to as crazy, I wonder what gifts are being lost to the community. Countless people wake up in the middle of the night wondering what is going to happen, what is going on in and around them. Some think they're crazy, some feel something incredible happening to them, others just go insane. This problem is not specific to the modern world, it also happens in Africa. The difference is that in the modern world, errant behaviors in a person is regarded as a personal problem concerning only that individual. The possibility that there's a larger meaning to be found in a person's experiences, which translate into something meaningful for that person's community, is rarely considered. So something that reason why I wanted to share that is because you know, it's this understanding that um I'm not free until we're all free, right? And also MLK said this in a different way. Injustice in one place anywhere is a threat to it everywhere, right? And the fact that indigenous peoples understand interconnectedness. The excerpt is from the book The Healing Wisdom of Africa by Malidoma Patrice Somé. We'll send it out in the email too, of just different names of different people that we have brought up here. And the reason why I'm sharing it is because with knowing that healing happens in the community, we have to look at the root causes of issues. Okay, if you're stressed out and you want to turn to herbal healing, or you want to turn to a spiritual reader, or you want to turn to whatever, that healer is going to help you, yes. But what are the root systems or root causes of your issues, right? Because it's such a layered thing, it's not just your personal problem or your personal failing or your personal impairment. There are systems that have failed you, because basically what he's saying in this passage is it's not just this person who's at fault or who is responsible for their own healing. We have to look at what systems failed this person to get to a place where they feel so unheld by what's around them that it's making their situation worse, right? And making them possibly be homeless if we're looking at it in the Western world, or homeless, or all these other things that people, some people with the more stigmatized mental health issues face, like schizophrenia, or bipolar, or borderline personality disorder, these things, right? So when we're trying to incorporate indigenous perspectives are inherently going to ask us to look at political systems or systems that have failed us or that may be causing stressors, by nature of these systems being so centered on the idea of community and interconnectedness and shared responsibilities that we have to one another.
I think we can also see the interconnectedness of it when we think about the diversity of plant medicine, and how I'm thinking specifically of tobacco, because the tobacco that the first peoples of North America used and was very diverse. They had many different species of tobacco, and they used them in many different ways. I mean, the most famous would be the peace pipe, but it looks very different from the tobacco of today, which is commercially produced by Philip Morris, and I think Atria is the other one, the other major cigarette producer. And they only produce a few types as filler. So that's something that when you were speaking, Elmina, I was thinking about that, about how that can, you know, and that limits biodiversity, because the, you know, native peoples don't, you know, they make sure to use these plants in a very sustainable way, and in a way that honors the holistic nature of the environment, whereas capitalism only produces to exploit. And I remember the first time I actually consumed tobacco, like actual ceremonial tobacco, and it's very different from the Newports that I smoked growing up. This, you know, we can say this about many other substances that we wouldn't even necessarily think of. Another one is cacao. We're starting to see a resurgence of cacao ceremonies, and it's very much divorced from the chocolate or even the raw cacao powder that you can buy at Trader Joe's. And even again, receiving ceremonial cacao is very different, and it's not interchangeable. But we kind of force these, you know, we try to force the medicines to fit in, you know, what is it, the analogy, the square pegs in the round holes? And and that's not how nature works at all.
Something that I notice a lot of, because you mentioned Whole Foods, something that people in the holistic communities do that you'll see on a lot of packages for things, it'll say made sustainably, right? And but what they mean, or what they're trying to say by that, is that they know, you know, where they are working directly with the people that they're getting this from. So people in some village in South America somewhere, or Africa somewhere, making shea butter, or whatever the case is. And something that I was reading on Asha's page the other day on one of their posts, they said something about not just being sustainable, but being regenerative. And I think something that we can challenge folks to do, or our suppliers, if any of us have businesses, or if we're buying from these people or anything like that, or start creating these things ourselves, is not just being sustainable, which I guess they think that just simply, you know, the fact that they know or are in direct contact with the village that they're getting this from, they say it's made sustainably. If you don't have a background in politics or international affairs or international economics, or the understanding of colonization and neo-colonization in new forms that it's taking, as a business person, it's not up to you to be able to determine what's sustainable for those people in that village that you're getting your cacao or your shea butter from, or whatever it is. Because these are countries that were colonized for centuries and had their resources taken forcefully with no payment. So when people are having these businesses like Whole Foods and or a lot of the white organizations within them, they are claiming that they're being sustainable, but not actually centering the people that they get the stuff from in their actual business decisions, right? In their actual framings of the company. These people are still just treated as suppliers, and the deeper economic and political reality of these countries are not being investigated. And in order for us to be regenerative, we need to regenerate the wealth. And I don't just mean wealth in money, I mean wealth in terms of knowledge of these plants, the cultural knowledge, the empowerment that these places and these villages had prior to colonization, and being able to give having opportunities for them to create power structures in those ways. That's something that was coming to me when people talk about sustainably made. We have our white sage sustainably made. We know where it comes from. It's not endangered. We know where our shea butter is. We know where this cacao is. Okay, but do you know those people? And do you know their stories? And do you know what their ancestors are going through? That's not really known. And something that I think people are going to have to do more and more is get into local stuff. We are in a digital age. You can order things online that's not near you if you really need it or what have you. But just encouraging people to get more familiar with local herbalists that are in their areas, looking at holistic healing events in their areas. When I first came, I knew of people here in DC because I'm from DC and I was just in spiritual spaces because that's just where I was. But when I moved to New York, I didn't know where the things were. I just went on Eventbrite, just a quick search. And I found Bronx Holistic Healing. I found various different orgs and spaces and really connect with the people that are around you who are herbalists, who are healers, to help them expand their work. Because sustainability and then the next step, regeneration, comes from us creating new systems and having the imagination to be able to believe that we can do this and then taking the action to create that. Because once you have spiritual imagination reactivated, you have to take action. You have to do it because it's inspiring. It's in spirit. This is also a connection that I have with Aries energy, and which is sidereal Pisces, and that the connection between those two signs. Sometimes people would say what we're doing here at IMHANI is too it's not realistic. That we can't dismantle the psych ward complex. The systems are too big. We're always just going to be oppressed and we can't do anything. Start where you are. You know, there's somebody in your community. Maybe you don't know them. Maybe you have to do a Google search or an Eventbrite search to find it. But there's somebody there. But you have to create the openness to start building with where you are and doing what you can where you are. Something that we've done at IMHANI because of our animal guide that we have that's visited us multiple times, the turtle. We're taking things slow, right? And we're honoring divine timing. This elder, Malidoma Patrice Some, I had the honor of seeing them speak at a herbal conference on my birthday in 2019. No, it was 2018, excuse me. And something that he said there really stuck with me. And he said, you don't need to have all these fancy degrees and all these fancy initiations and all these whatever you think you need to help somebody or to help yourself or to help your community. If you have the belief inside your mind, that means it can be enacted and you can just start where you are. So I just want to put that out there because we are about to wrap up, and I wanted to say that the work doesn't end here, but there were things said today that can plant seeds to help people be more reflective about the different ways solutions can show up. And we will be sharing resources from our past events, and we also will share resources from other like-minded orgs that weren't our personal events, but just free resources available for people to sort through some of these issues that we talked about today and connecting with your ancestors and things of that nature. And yeah, I just wanted to put that out there, that this work is not going to be something that happens overnight, but we need to be steadfast and not let capitalism or colonization take away our imagination or take away our ancestors speaking through us, right? Sometimes we feel like, and I have to be honest, I kind of felt like this recently leading up to this event. Sometimes we feel like questioning things, that Gemini energy of asking questions, or it being being very direct about something, which is kind of like Martian Aries energy. Sometimes Scorpio too, Mars rules Scorpio as well. We're kind of shown that in this society that is not right to do, that you're supposed to sit back and not make noise. I was taught in healing justice spaces that conflict avoidance and not asking these questions
kind of maintains systems and maintains privilege. And sometimes when we start asking these questions, we feel like there's something wrong with us. But these questions are things that our own intuition are guiding us to ask. This work is that our work that our own ancestors are guiding us to do. Sometimes your ancestors can speak to you through a question that you have about something. And that's what birthed this event, where people are learning and getting connecting with resources and learning about our page. Even before this, some people were learning from us. So I can be long-winded, I know. I'm gonna kind of wrap it up now, but I just wanted to put this out there that don't if you want to speak up about something, if you have a question, if something is bothering you, it could be from a place of care within you, spiritual care within you, asking you to investigate something or look into something and not feel like that's rude or there's something wrong with that. And if people feel that there's something wrong with that, that space isn't for you. And then you can be directed to spaces where you are invited and where you are open. So thank you. Does anyone else have anything to say as we close out? Any last comments? Okay, well, I'm just gonna close this out with the bowl again, like we did in the beginning. Um, you can close your eyes, you can take deep breaths, whatever works for you to. Oh, I did want to ask Mignon, the hoodoo herbalist that you worked with, are they taking clients? Do they have a site people can learn from or anything like that? I don't know if she heard me, but I will ask her after this, so that's just that we can list that person if they're open, just so people can learn more, because I feel like hoodoo and the African American experience and the Black experience in general, the different experiences the diaspora, the continent get left out of conversations, but especially when we're talking about Black people, specifically African Americans and the hoodoo tradition, I feel like gets people talk down on it, and there's this idea that like African Americans don't have a culture, and the Caribbeans and the Africans have culture and the African Americans don't. But hoodoo has its own unique aspects to it that African Americans have developed. And just like the African traditions and the Caribbean traditions, it also shares roots with indigenous African knowledge. And so I think it's important to uplift hoodoo practitioners. I was asking, is that person that you work with, Mignon, do they have a site, or are they taking clients or anything like that? Or are they teaching?
Yes, they do have a site. The site is called I think it's called mymysticherbalist.com, mymysticherbalist.com. And her name is Alicia, Alecia Ross, Ross. And she gives consultations. She has information on her website. And I also did an interview with her on my YouTube channel. Can I give that information for people who want to go and check out the interview? It just uploaded today. My YouTube channel is called Sacred Mysteries.
Okay.
Sacred Mysteries Worldwide. So you can go there, and all of her contact information is in the description of the video. So you can find her on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. Not YouTube, but Facebook and all the other places. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, everyone. So we're gonna close out with our bowl. And again, I want you to just imagine being supported by ancestors known and unknown, and remembering the nature spirit guides on the land that you're on, the indigenous guides that made the air and the water that you drink on your land possible, that made it possible for you to even be breathing here today. So there's gratitude. Okay, everybody, we want to thank you for being here today, for staying on, and for your patience as we were having issues with the Eventbrite and all of that. We will send out the recording. Feel free to share when we send the recording with anybody that may not have been able to come. And we'll also share the resources and the books and all the things named here in the conversation. You all have a great Sunday, okay? Bye.
Bye, and thank you so much, Elmina. It was awesome. I came in a little late, but I loved everything. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Peace and blessings all.
Thank you.